back in the golden age of American muscle. Detroit wasn't just building cars. It was cranking out legends. But among the icons, a few machines stood apart not just for their power or style, but because they were rare. We're talking ultra-limited production. Fewer than 1,000 units made. So buckle up, because we're diving into 10 of the rarest production muscle cars ever built. These aren't just cars. They're unicorns of the muscle era. Number 10 to 1969 Ford Torino Talladega. 754 units produced. In the high-stakes world of late 60s NASCAR, the name of the game was speed, and more importantly, aerodynamics. Dodge had just thrown down the gauntlet with the Daytona. Its wild nose cone and tall rear wing were turning heads and winning races. Ford needed an answer, fast. That answer came in the form of a bold, limited-run street machine. The 1969 Ford Torino Talladega. Not just a pretty face. This car was Ford's stealth missile, engineered in a rush to reclaim dominance on the oval tracks. But to race it in NASCAR, Ford had to play by the rules. That meant building at least 500 road-going versions, what's called homologation. And so, the Talladega was born. Unlike a regular Torino, the Talladega got a serious aerodynamic makeover. Its front end was extended by nearly 6 inches. The grille and bumper were reshaped and recessed to reduce drag. Even the rocker panels were rolled to give it a lower stance. Clever tricks to make it faster without looking outrageous. Under the hood, a 428 Cobra Jet V8. This beast pushed out an advertised 335 horsepower. But most believe it was making closer to 400. Paired with a heavy-duty C6 automatic transmission and a 3.25 rear axle ratio. It was built to fly, literally. This wasn't a quarter-mile bruiser. It was a 200 miles per hour bullet built to dominate superspeedways like Daytona and Talladega. Here's a kicker. Ford only built 754 of these cars between January and February of 1969. That's less than a month of production. Most were quickly scooped up by race teams, dealers in the know, and serious collectors. Unlike mass-produced muscle cars, the Talladega was never meant for wide release. It was a secret weapon disguised as a street car, and it worked. In 1969, Ford's Talladega helped legendary driver David Pearson take the NASCAR championship. It wasn't just a win on the track. It was a statement that Ford could outsmart and outpace the competition using both engineering and strategy. Today, finding a Talladega in original condition is a muscle car miracle. Because it flew under the radar, many ended up neglected or modified beyond recognition. But to those in the know, this car is more than just rare. It's a piece of racing history, a true homologation hero. So when we talk about rare muscle cars, this one checks all the boxes. Limited production track pedigree, and a story that screams underdog turned legend. The Torino Talladega wasn't just a car. It was Ford's missile aimed straight at the heart of the competition. And it hit the bullseye. Number 9 to 1970 Buick GSX, 678 units produced. When you think of classic muscle cars, names like Mustang, Charger, and Chevelle usually dominate the conversation. But in 1970, Buick, yes, Buick, decided to shake up the game. And what they built wasn't as fast, was outrageous, loud, luxurious, and incredibly rare. Introducing the 1970 Buick GSX, a car that proved luxury and brute force could coexist, and do it in style. Up until this point, Buick was mostly known for comfortable cruisers, cars your uncle or granddad might have owned. They were plush, well-built, and yes, fast. But no one expected Buick to build something that looked like it belonged on a drag strip. That changed with the GSX. Based on the already muscular GS 455. The GSX was Buick's answer to the Mopar Scat Pack and Ford's Cobra Jets. But Buick wasn't content to just make it faster. They wanted to make statement. Visually, the GSX was impossible to miss. It came in just 2 eye-catching colors. Apollo white or the now iconic Saturn yellow. A shade so bold, it could burn retinas in direct sunlight. Pair that with wide black stripes, front and rear spoilers, a functional ram air hood, and GSX badging everywhere. And you had a muscle car that screamed, "Don't mess with me." But the real magic was under the hood. The standard engine was the Buick 455 cubic inch V8, one of the largest and most torquey engines of the era. Rated at 350 horsepower and a jaw-dropping 510 lb-ft of torque, It delivered tire-melting acceleration with almost no effort. And if you opted for the Stage 1 performance package, you got bigger valves, a hotter cam, and beefed-up internals, turning the GSX into a legitimate street dominator. Despite its performance, Buick didn't strip it down. The GSX still had power windows, air conditioning, and a near-silent ride when cruising, luxury wrapped in a sledgehammer. It was the muscle car for someone who wanted everything. But here's where it gets really interesting. Buick only made 678 GSX units in 1970. That's it. In a sea of GTOs and Chargers, this car was a rare gem, even when it was brand new. Many buyers simply couldn't justify the price. It was expensive, more refined than its competitors, and most muscle car fans were chasing raw performance, not plush interiors. But today, that rarity has turned the GSX into one of the most desirable collector muscle cars out there. Surviving examples are prized, especially Stage 1 models, which can command serious money at auctions. But beyond the numbers and the hype, the GSX stands as a symbol of Buick's short but spectacular leap into the muscle car wars. It wasn't just about going fast, it was about going fast with class. And in 1970, no one did that better than the GSX. Would you like me to? Number 8, 1969 to 1970 Mercury Cougar Eliminator Boss 302. 638 units produced. When you hear Boss 302, your mind probably jumps straight to the Ford Mustang, a stripped-down street racer with track DNA and an engine that howled at high RPMs. But what if I told you there was another Boss 302, one that was rarer, more refined, and arguably even cooler? Meet the 1969 to 1970 Mercury Cougar Eliminator Boss 302. It's the Mustang's classy cousin, and one of the most overlooked and underrated muscle car unicorns ever built. The Cougar had always been positioned as the more upscale alternative to the Mustang. It shared the same basic platform, but added a touch of Lincoln-style luxury. Hidden headlamps, sequential turn signals, and a more refined interior. But in 1969, Mercury decided to throw all that civility out the window and go racing. Enter the Eliminator package, Mercury's one-shot answer to the muscle car craze. This was the Cougar's high-performance variant, and it didn't hold back. Visually, the Eliminator was loud. Bold racing stripes, hood scoops, front and rear spoilers, and a palette of wild, high-impact colors like grabber orange, competition blue, and bright yellow. You couldn't miss one even if you tried. But the real story was what lay under the hood. Mercury offered several engines with the Eliminator. Everything from a 351 Windsor to the monstrous 428 Cobra Jet. But the rarest and most exotic of them all? The Boss 302. Built for Trans Am racing, the Boss 302 engine was a high-revving, small-block screamer. Unlike the big-block brutes of the era, this V8 loved to live at the top of the tatch. It delivered around 290 horsepower, but insiders will tell you the real number was closer to 350, paired with a 4-speed manual and a competition suspension. This setup turned the Eliminator into a corner-carving beast that could take on Camaros and Challengers on any track. But here's the kicker. In 1969 and 1970 combined, Mercury only built 638 Cougar Eliminators with the Boss 302. That's it. Most buyers went for the bigger, more traditional engines, making the Boss 302 Eliminator one of the rarest performance combinations of the muscle car era. And unlike the Mustang, which was raw and minimal, the Cougar gave you high-end trim, plush seats, and a dash layout that felt more like a European Grand Tourer than a Detroit street brawler. Today, finding a genuine Boss 302 Eliminator is like spotting a unicorn in the wild. Most have been lost to time, hidden in barns, or disguised under incorrect restorations. But the ones that survive, they're cherished by collectors who understand just how special this blend of luxury and race-bred performance really was. The Cougar Eliminator Boss 302 wasn't just a muscle car. It was Mercury's boldest, wildest, and rarest shot at greatness. A machine that proved muscle could wear a suit and still throw a punch. Number 7 to 1969 Pontiac Firebird Trans Am, 634 produced. Before it became a pop culture icon, before Smokey and the Bandit, and before it became Pontiac's muscle poster child, the Trans Am was a rare beast. In 1969, it wasn't yet a household name. It wasn't mass-produced. In fact, it was barely known outside enthusiast circles. But for those lucky enough to understand what Pontiac was really doing, it was a secret weapon on wheels. The 1969 Pontiac Firebird Trans Am was the very first of its kind. It wasn't about flash, it was about function. It was born with a singular goal: dominate the Trans Am racing series. But there was one major problem. General Motors, Pontiac's parent company, had an internal ban on factory racing. No official racing programs, no bragging about track performance. So how do you build a race car when you're not allowed to race? Pontiac found a clever workaround. Instead of calling it a race car, they pitched it as a high-performance street package. But make no mistake, this was a race car in disguise. The Trans Am was based on the Firebird 400, but received major performance upgrades and styling cues that made it clear. This car meant business. Under the hood was a 400 cubic inch big block V8, with buyers getting the option of two different Ram Air setups, Ram Air 3 or the ultra-rare Ram Air 4. Both were officially rated at 366 horsepower, but in reality, those numbers were purposefully understated. The Ram Air 4 in particular came with a radical camshaft, high flow heads, forged internals, and a racing-grade intake. Insiders knew it could easily push well over 400 horsepower in the right hands. And the looks? Just as iconic. The 1969 Trans Am was only available in polar white with bold blue racing stripes. It sat on Rally 2 wheels and came with an aggressive front splitter, rear spoiler, and dual hood scoops. This was a car designed to look fast even when parked. Pontiac even added functional air extractors on the front fenders, subtle hints of its race-ready nature. But here's the kicker. Pontiac only built 634 units of the 1969 Trans Am, and of those, only 8 were convertibles. That's not just rare. That's collector-grade unicorn rare. Most people have never seen one in person. It was too ahead of its time, too misunderstood by casual buyers, and too niche for a mainstream launch. But for true enthusiasts, it was an instant legend. Today, the 69 Trans Am is one of the most sought-after muscle cars ever made. It represents the beginning of something big, the birth of a performance dynasty that would dominate the 70s and beyond. Long before the Trans Am became a movie star, it was a rebel, a street-legal outlaw built in defiance of the rules, a car that said, "We will race one way or another." Let me know. Number 6, 1970 to 1971 Plymouth Barracuda HEMI, 617 produced. Some muscle cars were built to turn heads. Others were built to dominate the streets. But a rare few, like the 1970 to 1971 Plymouth Barracuda HEMI, were built to scare the hell out of anything on 4 wheels. This was no ordinary car. This was Detroit muscle at its absolute peak. A snarling, fire-breathing beast with a reputation so fierce, it was whispered about in car magazines and feared at every stoplight. The HEMI Cuda wasn't just a car, it was a warning. By 1970, the muscle car war had hit full throttle. Chrysler had a monster in its arsenal. The legendary 426 HEMI V8, a motor that started its life on the racetrack, crushing the competition in NASCAR before being tamed barely for street use. That engine had already made waves in cars like the Dodge Charger and Plymouth Roadrunner. But when engineers dropped it into the newly redesigned third-generation Barracuda, magic happened. The 1970 and 1971 Barracudas had a low, wide, aggressive stance. They looked like coiled muscle. And when you added the HEMI option, you turned the car into a rolling thunderstorm. Officially rated at 425 horsepower and 490 lb-ft of torque, everyone in the know understood those numbers were, once again, sandbagged. Real-world dyno runs often revealed well over 500 horsepower stock. It wasn't just about straight-line speed either. The HEMI package came with beefed-up suspension, heavy-duty cooling, special K-members, and optional Dana rear axles. This car was ready to race or terrorize your neighborhood. But all that power came at a cost, literally. The HEMI option tacked on nearly $900 to the base price, a huge jump in $1970. Insurance was sky-high. And let's not forget, it guzzled gas like an aircraft carrier. As a result, only 617 HEMI Cuda Coupes were ever built across the 1970 and 1971 model years. Just 17 convertibles were produced, making those soft tops among the rarest muscle cars on Earth. Today, if you see one at auction, don't be surprised if the bidding starts north of $1 million. But beyond the rarity, beyond the numbers, the 1970 to 71 HEMI Cougar represents the muscle car era in its final glorious form, before insurance crackdowns and emissions laws brought it all crashing down. The HEMI Cougar wasn't just loud. It was violent, beautiful, unapologetic. It wasn't made to be practical. It was made to be unforgettable. And over 50 years later, it still is. Number 5 to 1969 Dodge Charger Daytona, 504 produced. This isn't just a muscle car. This is a missile in disguise. The 1969 Dodge Charger Daytona wasn't built for cruising boulevards or flexing at red lights. It was built with a single clear purpose: dominate NASCAR. And to do that, Dodge didn't just think outside the box. They smashed the box into pieces. By the late 60s, Dodge was desperate to win. Their cars were fast, but not fast enough. Aerodynamics had become the new secret weapon on NASCAR's high-speed ovals, where top speeds flirted with 200 miles per hour. At that speed, every curve, crease, and contour made the difference between winning and watching. So Dodge's engineers did something bold, something no one in Detroit had done before. They took the familiar Charger R/T, already a legend in the muscle car world, and transformed it into a purpose-built aerodynamic monster. The result? The Charger Daytona, named not just for style, but for its battlefield, Daytona International Speedway. The changes were radical. Up front was a nearly 2-foot aerodynamic nose cone, a complete redesign of the Charger's blunt front end to help slice through the air. Up back, a massive 23-inch rear wing bolted to the rear deck lid, so tall it could function without interference from the car's turbulent body air. It looked insane. People thought Dodge had lost their minds. But on the track, it worked. The Charger Daytona became the first car in NASCAR history to break 200 miles per hour. It wasn't just competitive, it was unstoppable. In fact, it was too good. After dominating the superspeedways, NASCAR changed the rules the following year, banning the wild aero cars from competition. That's right, this car was so advanced it got itself outlawed. To make the Daytona eligible for NASCAR, Dodge had to build at least 500 street-legal versions for public sale. In the end, they built 504 units. And while they had all the race-ready looks, they were also legitimate muscle machines on the street. Most were equipped with either a 440 Magnum V8 or the legendary 426 HEMI, offering brutal acceleration and unforgettable sound. Today, the Charger Daytona is more than just a car. It's a symbol of racing innovation, of when automakers weren't afraid to break the rules, stretch the limits, and push technology forward in the name of victory. The 1969 Dodge Charger Daytona wasn't built to be pretty. It was built to be fast. And in doing so, it became one of the wildest, most purpose-driven machines ever unleashed on American roads. A car born in the wind tunnel, raised on the racetrack, and remembered as one of the greatest engineering marvels of the muscle car era. Number 4 to 1969 Dodge Charger 500 produced. When most muscle car fans hear Dodge Charger, their minds immediately jump to the legendary 1969 Dodge Charger Daytona, the wild-winged rocket ship that shook NASCAR to its core. But before the Daytona took flight, there was another Charger that quietly laid the groundwork, the Dodge Charger 500. While the original 1968 Charger was undeniably a looker, with that bold, deep-set grille and signature concave rear glass, it had a critical flaw when it came to NASCAR racing. At speeds approaching 200 miles per hour, style alone couldn't win races. The stock Charger simply wasn't aerodynamic enough to cut through the air efficiently. This lack of aerodynamic finesse meant it struggled to keep up with rivals on the superspeedways. Despite packing serious firepower under the hood and skilled drivers at the wheel. Recognizing this problem, Dodge engineers went back to the drawing board and created the Charger 500, a special limited edition model built to meet NASCAR's homologation rules, meaning they had to produce at least 500 street-legal cars for the racing version to be eligible. Only 500 Chargers 500 were built, making it a rare and intriguing chapter in muscle car history. So, what made the Charger 500 different? For starters, it featured a flush-mounted grille instead of the recessed design of the regular Charger, reducing drag and helping the front end slice through the air with less resistance. The headlights, which were usually hidden behind doors on the standard Charger, were fixed and exposed for better airflow. The rear glass was swapped out for a more traditional flat window design, replacing the signature concave glass. All these changes were designed with one goal: make the Charger faster on the track. Under the hood, buyers had two powerhouse options. The 440 Magnum V8 was a formidable engine capable of delivering serious muscle, while for the purists and speed demons, Dodge offered the legendary 426 HEMI, race-bred powerhouse that was the gold standard of American V8s. Either engine meant the Charger 500 was no slouch, ready to roar off the line with authority. But here's the twist. Just a few months after the Charger 500 hit the streets, Dodge unleashed the Daytona, with its radical nose cone and towering rear spoiler. The Daytona was an aerodynamic marvel, designed in the wind tunnel and built to dominate NASCAR in a way the Charger 500 simply couldn't match. Overnight, the Charger 500 was overshadowed by its flashier, more extreme sibling. It became the middle child of the Dodge muscle family, a critical stepping stone that's often forgotten, but absolutely essential. Without the lessons learned from the Charger 500's aerodynamic experiments, Dodge wouldn't have been able to create the revolutionary Daytona that changed racing history forever. Today, the Charger 500 remains a hidden gem, loved and remembered mostly by hardcore Mopar enthusiasts. It may not have the wild looks or the headline-grabbing fame of the Daytona, but it was a crucial piece of the puzzle, the unsung hero that helped Dodge rise to the top of NASCAR's high-speed game. Next, number 3 to 1970 Chrysler 300 Hurst 500 produced. In 1970, Chrysler and Hurst Performance joined forces to create something truly special, a car that wasn't just muscle, but muscle wrapped in style and luxury. Enter the 1970 Chrysler 300 Hurst, a rare and refined beast with only 500 ever produced. It was a bold statement from Chrysler, saying muscle cars didn't have to be raw and rugged. They could be powerful and polished. The 300 Hurst rode on Chrysler's full-size platform, meaning this was no lightweight compact. It was a heavyweight contender. Despite tipping the scales at over 2 tons, it moved with surprising agility, thanks to the massive 440 cubic inch V8 engine under the hood, cranking out a solid 395 horsepower. That big block grunt meant it wasn't just a cruiser. It was a muscle car with authority. But the 300 Hurst wasn't just about power. It was about presence. The car wore a striking white and gold paint scheme that really popped, eye-catching and classy. Inside, the luxury continued with details and trim that matched the exterior's boldness, giving drivers a sense of exclusivity and comfort. One of the signature touches was the rear spoiler, seamlessly molded into the deck lid, a subtle nod to its Hurst racing heritage. This wasn't just a styling flourish. It added to the car's road-hugging performance, keeping it planted at speed. The Chrysler 300 Hurst was a true blend of muscle and sophistication, combining brute force with luxury cruiser qualities. It represented a different side of the muscle car era, one where comfort met raw power, and style wasn't sacrificed for speed. Today, its rarity and unique character make the 300 Hurst a highly sought-after collector's gem, a shining example of Chrysler's ability to innovate beyond the typical muscle car formula. Number 2 to 1965 Chevrolet Chevelle Z16 200 produced. Sometimes the fastest cars don't scream for attention. Sometimes they sneak in quietly like a shadow. That's exactly what the 1965 Chevrolet Chevelle Z16 was, an unassuming powerhouse disguised as a regular Chevelle, but packed with serious muscle under the hood. Only 200 of these sleepers were ever made, making it one of Chevrolet's best-kept secrets from the golden era of muscle. What set the Z16 apart? It wasn't flashy advertisements or loud graphics. Instead, it was a 396 cubic inch V8 engine, mated to a 4-speed manual transmission, ready to unleash serious performance. This was Chevrolet's way of slipping a big block powerhouse into the mid-size market without raising too many eyebrows. The Z16 came equipped with heavy-duty suspension and drivetrain components, designed to handle the extra power without breaking a sweat. But Chevrolet didn't shout about this. In fact, the Z16 was so low-key that many dealers didn't even know it existed. This stealthy muscle car was fast, undeniably fast, but came at a premium price. For many buyers, That meant passing on the Z16 in favor of more affordable options, which is why only 200 were built. Today, this rarity makes the Z16 a true unicorn, a highly coveted treasure among muscle car enthusiasts and collectors. The Chevelle Z16's legacy is proof that sometimes the most powerful cars don't need to shout. They let their performance speak for itself. Number 1 to 1969 Chevrolet Camaro ZL-1 produced. At first glance, the 1969 Chevrolet Camaro ZL-1 looks like any other Camaro from that year. But peel back the layers, and you uncover one of the most ferocious muscle cars ever built. A race-bred monster so fast, it barely qualified as street legal. And with only 69 produced, this is one of the rarest and most legendary muscle cars in history. The ZL-1 was Chevrolet's well-guarded secret, never officially listed in brochures or advertising. It was reserved for insiders, top drag racers, and a few savvy dealers who knew this car was something truly special. Its heart was a 7.0-liter, 427 cubic inch, aluminum block V8, originally designed for Can-Am racing teams, capable of revving high and pumping out around 550 horsepower. And most experts agree that was a conservative estimate. Chevrolet built about 200 of these aluminum block engines, but only 69 ZL-1 Camaros ever left the factory with one installed. These Copo Central Office production order cars were engineered to dominate the drag strip. And dominate they did. They were brutally fast, with blistering acceleration and a racing pedigree that made the ZL-1 a legend even among muscle car enthusiasts. The Camaro ZL-1 wasn't just about raw power. It was built to win. Its lightweight aluminum engine helped keep the car nimble, and it was backed by racing-grade suspension and components that made it a formidable competitor on the strip. Today, the ZL-1 stands as a symbol of Chevrolet's engineering genius during muscle cars' heyday. A car built not just to be fast, but to dominate. For collectors and fans, owning a ZL-1 is like holding a piece of automotive history that few will ever experience firsthand.